All right. Well, we're moving back towards species at risk. So last but certainly not least, we have Amy Russell from Coastal Action on the South Shore, who's going to bring our focus back over to even a more endangered species, our actually most at-risk fish in all of Canada, I think, at least Nova Scotia, a really rare fish called the Atlantic whitefish. We talked a little bit about this at a Young Naturalist Club event almost like 2 years ago now, and it was fascinating. So I'm really excited for your talk, Amy. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. I've been having trouble with my headphones recently, so it's perfect. I'm also dealing with a dual monitor, so if I'm not always looking at the screen, that's why, or looking at the webcam, I should say. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me. So, okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. I'm having trouble getting this full screen here. Oh my, it's been a while since I've done a Zoom presentation, actually. How do you do the presenter mode again?
Well, it looks like you're in it now. I can see your slides. All right. I use my left and right arrow when I'm flipping through.
Okay, I just can't see my notes, but that's okay.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, it's all good. It's actually a good thing that I've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings recently, so that's good. Anyway, hi, my name is Amy Russell. I'm a Species at Risk and Biodiversity Project Coordinator at Coastal Action. And as Becky said, I'm going to be talking to you about the Atlantic whitefish. And yes, it is the most considered the most endangered fish in Canada. And it's found right here in Nova Scotia, which is very exciting. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that our work takes place on Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and that's where I'm joining you from today. I am a peace and friendship ally. I feel very privileged to be here today. For those of you who don't know, Coastal Action is a charitable organization based out of Mahone Bay. And our goal is to promote the restoration and conservation of our environment through research, education, and action. We have 5 core teams: watersheds and water quality, climate change, environmental education, coastal and marine, and my own team, Species at Risk and Biodiversity. A little bit of an overview. I'll be giving a background on the Atlantic whitefish, and then talking about our Atlantic whitefish recovery project at Coastal Action and what methods we've been using over the years to help the whitefish recovery, including the management of invasive fish. And then I will discuss the introductions and impacts of invasive fish in the whitefish habitat in the Petite Riviere watershed. Atlantic whitefish have also been known as Acadian, Sioux, or round whitefish. They're a member of the salmonid family, along with salmon and trout. And they're a very ancient species. They're actually the most primitive of the whitefishes, which is in the Gorgonid genus. And they're listed under the Species at Risk Act as endangered, both globally and critically. And like I said before, they're considered to be the rarest fish in Canada. They were actually also the first fish oh my gosh, I'm having trouble with Sunday night. First fish species to be declared endangered by COSEWIC in 1984, which is the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. And that was reconfirmed in 2000 and 2010. And subsequently, the Atlantic Whitefish Conservation and Recovery Team was formed in 1999 as a joint venture between DFO, Nova Scotia Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture, and the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources. And they were mandated to work towards preserving the remainder of the wild population in the Petite Riviere. In 2003, Atlantic whitefish were listed as endangered when the Species at Risk Act, or SARA, was enacted. And under that act, there are provisions to protect individuals, their residences, and their critical habitat. And then Coastal Action began the Atlantic Whitefish Recovery Project in 2004 in cooperation with the Conservation and Recovery Team. After the SARA listing, a recovery strategy was published in 2007, followed by an action plan. Atlantic whitefish are endemic to Canada and specifically to Nova Scotia. So this is the only place this species exists now in the entire world. Previously, populations are only have known to existed in both the Tusket River and Petite Riviere watersheds in Nova Scotia. Those are highlighted in orange and red in the map, but it's expected that their historical range included other watersheds as well, and potentially other places in the world, but that is all we know. So they have not been recorded in the Tusket or Annis rivers in Yarmouth County since 1964 and 1982 respectively. So that population is now considered to be extirpated or non-existent in that region. Historically, this species was anadromous, meaning it spent part of its life in the ocean and then would return to freshwater to spawn. However, the construction of dams in Nova Scotia in the late 1790s restricted this passage between freshwater and saltwater, and then the species became landlocked. Now, the only wild population known to remain is in the 3 interconnected lakes of the Upper Petite Riviere watershed above Heb Dam, which is marked on the map in a thick red line. And despite this, they still show a preference for salt water. So the three lakes that they're in are Heb, Malipsagit, and Menanpi. When populations were anadromous, they would spend their summers in the ocean, and then they would start their migration into fresh water in the early fall, move further upstream in early October or November, and then head up to the lakes to spawn in the late fall or winter. They would overwinter in these lakes, and then in the spring begin the migration back to the ocean. The current lake resident population also likely spawns in early winter, but the exact timing is still unknown. With the landlocked population not being able to return to the ocean during the warmer summer months, they prefer to utilize the cooler, deeper areas of the lakes as thermal refuge. Not much else is known about their habitat requirements, such as their precise spawning, nursery, and rearing ground locations and preferences. But that's part of what we do, is to fill those knowledge gaps. In the wild, Atlantic whitefish are estimated to spawn at an average age of 3 to 4 years. However, the maximum age of wild individuals is estimated to be between 4 to 5 years, so that doesn't leave much time for reproduction. The average length of anadromous adults was between 18 or 40 centimeters, but they're on the smaller end of that for the landlocked population, around 22 centimeters. And there's an adult Atlantic whitefish picture in the top screen. In terms of their diet, the adults of the Tusket Annis population mainly fed on amphipods, periwinkles, and marine worms. And in the Petite Riviere, being landlocked, they mainly feed on plankton, insects, minnows, and fish eggs. But the diet of the previous anadromous population in the Petite was likely very similar to the Tusket Annis population. Larval Atlantic whitefish in the lakes mainly feed on zooplankton, which are tiny aquatic animals, and particularly Daphnia species. And in the top right corner of the screen, you can see a Daphnia catawba, which is one of the species that they like, and which is very populous in these lakes. And then as they grow, they diversify to larger invertebrates, mainly mayflies, which there's another picture of in the bottom right screen, and also small fish. In terms of the ID, they're visually very similar to lake whitefish. The lake whitefish inhabit large rivers and cold freshwater lakes across New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Labrador, right through across Canada to BC, and as well in the Northwest Territories. Both have an adipose fin, which is typical of salmonids, as well as a deeply forked caudal or tail fin. But the dorsal and caudal fins of the Atlantic whitefish are dusky, whereas the fins of the lake whitefish are clear or lightly pigmented. The underbellies of both are silvery white, but Atlantic whitefish have a dark blue or green back, whereas lake whitefish have a pale green or brown or dark brown or black back for populations that are more inland. The Atlantic whitefish have a terminal mouth, so their upper and lower jaws are approximately equal in size and at the end of their snout. Whereas the lake whitefish are subterminal, so it's still at the end of the snout, but the lower jaw is slightly shorter. And there's a picture at the bottom there of the lake whitefish mouth. Gaspereaux also look very similar to Atlantic whitefish from above and are silvery on their sides, but their mouths face upwards and they don't have the adipose fin. And then if you want to get really specific and have the ability to count scales, which is not recommended unless the fish happens to be deceased or you can safely get a good photo or video. The Atlantic whitefish have about 90 to 100 scales along its lateral line, whereas lake whitefish have less than 88. And then a couple additional features of the Atlantic whitefish are that they have larger scales than trout and salmon. They don't have any spots or upper body markings, and they have small but well-developed teeth. These are the primary threats that whitefish have faced and still face currently. To no surprise, all are related to human activities, which have altered the physical habitat, hydrography, and water chemistry of the watersheds. The construction of dams and the operation of water supply facilities pose a threat by blocking access to the sea and to other individuals and populations, and by causing water levels to fluctuate. The damming of the Tusket River in 1929, rising acidity, and bycatch from Gaspereaux fisheries, poaching, and predation by introduced invasive fish, smallmouth bass and chain pickerel, pictured on the left, are believed to be the main contributors that led to the rapid decline of the Tusket annis population in the 1940s and 50s. The incidentally caught and poached whitefish were consumed by people. They're considered a tasty fish, and there was even a minor sport fishery at one time. For the population in the Petite, the Heb Dam was constructed as early as 1901. So the current population has been considered landlocked to those three lakes above the dam for over 100 years. And to help restore fish passage, a fishway was constructed at the Heb Dam in 2012. But so far there has been no evidence of the restored anadromy. These lakes supply the water for the town of Bridgewater, so water levels tend to fluctuate. But a positive outcome of that is that the human activity is more restricted, including using gas boat motors, which aren't permitted on Heb and Malitsiget lakes, without authorization, I should say. Like in the Tusket annis region, pickerel and bass were unfortunately also introduced into the Petite and are a huge threat to the survival and recovery of the remaining population. Acidification from land-based activities is also a potential threat in the Petite, but fortunately the Petite watershed has a better buffering capacity, and Atlantic whitefish are considered to be relatively tolerant to acidic conditions, but it is still a concern, and of course into the future as well. And finally, it's expected that the population is experiencing a genetic bottleneck due to the inadequate fish passage, still struggling with that one, and low population numbers. The population size is currently unknown, but from a study in 2012, between 18 and 38 individuals were estimated to make up the breeding population for the species. And from the larval Atlantic whitefish that we've collected in the past few years, in the last DNA analysis that was done, the fish have been genetically linked to only 13 mothers. So we know the population is very, very, very low. Also, there have only been 4 known or like confirmed sightings of adult Atlantic whitefish in the wild since 2014. 3 of those have occurred in the last 3 years, which is very exciting, from 2020 to this year, while we're conducting some of our other activities. So it's been very nice to see adults. Okay. So a little bit more about the invasive fish introductions. Oops, too far. Oh gosh. All right. So smallmouth bass were first released into the Nova Scotia lakes in 1908, likely for recreational fishing, as they're considered a fun sport fish. There was a release of bass in 1942 in a lake in Yarmouth County, which was authorized by the government. The last authorized introduction in Nova Scotia, though, occurred in 1984. And then in the petite, they were first recorded in the lower reaches of the watershed in 1994. And a study conducted in 2003 confirmed the presence of reproducing smallmouth bass population in the upper petite, so in the lakes above the Heb Dam. Pickerel, on the other hand, are thought to have arrived in Nova Scotia in the 1940s from either accidental and or illegal introductions. And they were first observed in the Petite Riviere watershed by Coastal Action in 2013. Both species now have a well-established breeding populations in the Petite. Smallmouth bass are in all 3 of the whitefish lakes, but thankfully pickerel are only in 2 of the 3. They have not yet been observed in Menamke Lake. To no surprise, non-native invasive species can have many impacts on the local ecosystem. For introduced bass and pickerel in particular, the impacts of these species on native fish populations have been well documented. Being predatory fish, both species impact whitefish directly through predation. This was evident in a multi-year study that Coastal Action conducted on the stomach contents of bass and pickerel. In the photo there, there's pickerel, and there were unfortunately three juvenile Atlantic whitefish in that one's stomach. Both have a very broad diet, especially pickerel, who pretty much eat anything that's in the water. We found invertebrates, fish, amphibians, reptiles, and even rodents. Pretty much anything that's in the water, they will eat it. So this can cause a trophic disruption in the lake ecosystem, and also cause a competition for resources with Atlantic whitefish, as well as for habitat and their with their growing presence and no natural predators in the system except for each other. So they're running rampant. So that brings us to the Atlantic Whitefish Recovery Project at Coastal Action, which began in 2004. And when it began, it mostly involved gaining info about the species and its habitat, identifying and filling those knowledge gaps, and increasing public awareness and involvement. We've continued outreach throughout the years, getting the word out there through presentations like this, events, and more recently, social media. We use various fishing methods to capture and remove invasive fish species, such as passive fish traps, angling, and boat electrofishing. I'll be going into a little bit more detail about these methods in a bit, but there's a photo of our rotary screw trap in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide, and then a picture of, in the top left corner, on the electrofishing boat of the netters at sunset. Any native fish that we incidentally catch through the same methods as when we're doing invasive removals are measured and counted and then quickly released back into the water where they were caught. But then we use this data to monitor the native fish populations. In terms of habitat assessments, monitoring, and restoration, we've done bathymetry surveys of the lakes. So we've used sonar equipment, which is in the middle photo, to map the bottom of the lakes and get a picture of the habitat and ideas of the areas that the whitefish can use as for that cold water refuge in the summers. We also conduct monthly water quality monitoring in each of the Atlantic Whitefish lakes and at 19 sites throughout the Petite watershed, using a YSI multi-parameter probe, which takes a lot of different measurements of things like temperature and dissolved oxygen and pH. The water quality monitoring in the lakes also helps us determine where the thermocline is during those hot summer months. It helps us monitor that. And then there's also been some restoration of fish passage in the Petite. So the installation of the fish passage facility at the Heb Dam, as I mentioned, in 2012. And then also a fish ladder was installed at the Crosstown Dam, which is in the Lower Petite, in 2018. And so these efforts were hopefully to restore the potential for the upstream migration of Atlantic whitefish. Other restoration efforts have included digger logs installed in Wildcat Brook, which is pretty close to the Heb Dam, and a restoration of a shale pit next to that same brook, Wildcat Brook. And the pH actually after that restoration actually increased from 4.58 to 6.39, so vast improvement. Zooplankton, as I mentioned, are the main food source for larval and juvenile Atlantic whitefish. We sample zooplankton by doing vertical tows with a plankton net in the whitefish lakes. And then we monitor the relative species composition and food availability for the whitefish. We typically sample monthly from spring through the fall, but this year we have been conducting weekly samples starting at ice out to see what the species assemblages are and the emergence times are after the whitefish hatch, since they hatch sometime in the winter. We also partnered with Dalhousie University, and they have a captive rearing and breeding program now at their Aquatron lab. So this will help improve more larval fish reach maturity and increase the existing population size. We started collecting larval Atlantic whitefish in 2018 from the Petite using our passive fish traps, and then we transport them to Dalhousie. Because whitefish are winter spawners and the fish hatch in late winter, early spring, these collections take place in May or June. So they're going on right now. Since it takes 3 to 4 years for Atlantic whitefish to reach maturity for breeding, the fish at Dal right now that we collected in 2018 have just started laying eggs this winter, which is really exciting. In addition to supporting the current population with this breeding program, the hope is also to expand their current range in the future to areas that may be more suitable for their long-term survival. With climate change, the rising temperatures, acidity. So we're basically looking for lakes that are free from invasives, have good water quality and acidity. They're deep enough that they have that cold water refuge and that are away from human development. So DFO, with the help from Coastal Action and the Nova Scotia Salmon Association and other partners, have been studying and identifying those potential translocation lakes for future releases with the DAL program. But we are going to start with reintroducing them into the same lakes that they already exist in. There's also a streamside rearing facility in development that we're hoping is going to be up and running this fall. This will limit the transport distance of the fish, and the tanks will be fed water directly from the Petite, so the fish will be in the same water chemistry. And then they will be fed zooplankton directly from those lakes as much as possible. And then eDNA. DFO is also conducting eDNA, or environmental DNA work, which is a really cool method for identifying species that have recently passed through an area. So in this case, this is being done through collecting water samples, but DNA can also be extracted from other types of samples, such as soil. And the Atlantic Whitefish Recovery Project is currently supported by DFO and the Habitat Stewardship Program. So I will dive into the invasive fish management part of the Whitefish Recovery Project. We've been doing this since 2006. We've been monitoring and removing invasive fish from the Petite Riviere and adjacent watersheds. And since at the time in 2006, there was little known about the invasive fish presence, distribution, population size, and threats to Atlantic whitefish in the watershed. Our activities mostly began with surveys to determine fish assemblages and smallmouth bass nest locations. And then over time, our removal efforts have intensified. Now that invasive fish are well established in the lakes, the management strategy is largely focused on those removal efforts. And as already mentioned, for many years, we also conducted summit content analyses on bass and pickerel to see what they're eating. And every fish that is captured is recorded and measured to fork lengths. And in some years, other biological data was collected, such as weight, life stage, and gender. We've employed both passive and active fishing methods for conducting surveys, doing those biological studies, and the removals. Currently for removals, we are using rotary screw traps, bike nets, and a trap that was installed at the Heb Dam Fishway. And most recently, light traps, which are pretty small traps, but they're good for capturing larval stage fish. And in terms of active fishing methods, we primarily use boat electrofishing for removals now, as that has been the most efficient method. But we also do some angling, mostly during bass nesting season, and also backpack electrofishing, which is in the photo. We used to do more angling, but once we switched gears to more intensive removal efforts, we did a study to compare the efficiency of angling versus boat electrofishing and found that boat electrofishing was more efficient and captured a wider range of sizes and maturities of fish, from really tiny larval fish to huge adults, whereas the angling only captured adult fish. And then in addition to the methods that we still use today, in the past, we've also used eel and minnow pots, beach seines, gill nets, and various types of trap nets. Bass net surveys were one of our first invasive fish activities. When the study began in 2006, it started with preliminary surveys to identify where the bass were nesting in the 3 lakes and what type of habitat they prefer. And now we target certain areas of the lakes that were identified to have the highest nesting activities. Those bass nests are located in shallow water along the shores of the lakes and most often on cobble substrate. So in the spring, we typically conduct bass nest surveys by boat to identify active nests, their status, so whether they're newly excavated, there's been eggs laid, or they're hatched. And then we destroy the nests containing the eggs or fry to help limit the recruitment. So in the bottom left-hand photo, there's a nest with eggs on them. And then next to that is a partially hatched nest with some fry. And we also record the old or previously used nests that we come across and compare it year to year to see if generally the bass nests are decreasing. And then this past year, we snorkeled for the surveys instead of just identifying them from the boat with our viewfinders. This was a lot more efficient and cut down on the survey time, and we will be doing that again this year. Last year, we also trialed using the light traps, which are in the top right-hand corner, right after the bass nest surveys at active nest sites to capture those recently hatched bass and pickerel. And then you can see photos of the larval pickerel at the top and the larval bass in the bottom right. Very, very tiny. And this was a successful trial deploying them right after the bass nest surveys. So we'll be doing that again this year. Catch the nests that we didn't get through the surveys. And then here's some photos of our boat electrofishing operations. The boat is owned by DFO, and I can go more into that if people have questions, but I think in essence of time, I'll skip through it. But generally, we start our surveys just after sunset when it gets dark, and there's some LED lights on the boat, and this helps visibility in the water. And this is mainly used for removals of invasive fish. And then the native fish get put into the live well in the middle of the boat to recover. And then after we're finish surveying the site, they go immediately back into the lake. And here's some more photos of our passive fish traps that we currently use. In the top left-hand corner is our rotary screw trap, also known as a smolt wheel. So there's a conical drum that floats on pontoons, and as the water flows through the drum, it spins and funnels the fish to the back into a holding well, where we can then access and sample the fish. And then the fyke net in the bottom left-hand corner, we set these up in coves and outlets. The wings of the net span from one side of the shore to the other and funnel the fish into the net and then into the holding box in the back. We also use these rotary screw traps and fyke nets to collect the larval Atlantic whitefish in the spring, which is in the middle photo. Pretty cute, in my personal unbiased opinion. And again, we're doing that right now. And then on the right-hand side is the Heb fishway trap. And we use this to monitor and control the species traveling into the Heb Lake and the upper Petite. So we're mostly using this to monitor the upstream migration of grass roe and any other native fish moving upstream and prevent any invasive fish from getting through. So what are some things that you can do? First of all, learn to identify the Atlantic whitefish. That's a really important one. And if you're recreationally fishing in the Petite Riviere, become familiar with the closure times and areas. It is quite restricted in the Petite because of the whitefish and during whitefish spawning time. If you accidentally do capture an adult Atlantic whitefish, try to minimize handling as much as possible. If you have it in a net or in a controlled area, if you're able to take a quick photo or video if possible to help verify the sighting, that would be great. But if not, just release it and make a note and notify DFO, or you can also reach out to me. And if you're unsure of the ID, you can always send me a photo and I can hopefully help with that. And also pass the word on to DFO. We just like to know all the sightings. They're very rare, so it's just good to spot them and know what time of year they are at different areas. Definitely helps. And of course, I'm sure all of you are well aware of helping prevent the further spread of invasives, not just fish, but plants and other species. Nova Scotia Invasive Species Council have some really good resources on their website that's on the screen. And then also consider recreationally fishing for bass and pickerel. Just get them out of the system, and they're also really fun to angle. So yeah, consider that. And I have a video here of an adult whitefish while you think of your questions, if you have any.
Thanks, Amy. That fish was really cute.
Yeah.
David has two questions. One about the limnological profiles. He's saying that he had seen a report of low oxygen levels early in the 2000s and was wondering if there's any concern about O2 levels in deep waters that you're seeing.
Absolutely. I don't deal with this project is a multi-team project. So the watersheds and water quality team does deal with that side of it more. But yeah, dissolved oxygen is definitely a concern, and especially during the really hot summer months and that massive thermocline, it definitely has been a concern and something we're keeping an eye on. I don't have the numbers in my brain at the moment, but yeah, I mean, we are still seeing larval whitefish every spring and also adults. So there is some area for them somewhere, but yeah, it's definitely a concern.
Okay, it's nice to be cautiously hopeful for a change.
Yes, right.
He's also wondering if there's been efforts elsewhere to get rid of invasive species like smallmouth bass, and if they've been successful, or is this the first really intensive effort at that?
Oh, that is a very good question. I think I mean, there's a lot of organizations that are doing removal efforts, and DFO is doing a lot of efforts, especially in like Ketchimakujik and other areas. I think we're probably one of the more intensive places that we're doing these intensive surveys and intensive removals, just because of the Atlantic whitefish. Yeah, it's probably in the area, it's probably the most intensive of the removals, but they are doing it in other watersheds and other areas. We do have like a habitat restoration plan in the Lahave, which is a neighboring watershed, and we also do invasive removals there. So yeah, they're happening all over the province, but probably more intensive in the Petite.
Okay, well, we'll have to check back
Full time.
Maybe in 10 years or so, we could check back in and compare across and see if some are more successful than others. Interesting.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much. You're actually our last speaker of the entire celebration. So thanks for finishing us off with a cool topic. Bob, I suppose I should turn the floor over to you for a wrap up here. Thank you everyone for sticking around. I know we're over time. There's just so many cool things to talk about. Bob, did you see the note from David?
Yeah, yes, although I'm not sure exactly. He did talk about the business of if it was been done successfully in other places. The active ingredient is rotenone in a lot of the lake materials, which originally some Indians in South America used to pound this stuff, and it coats the gills of any underwater animal. So it's pretty wide spectrum as far as a biocide is concerned. And for example, just recently they found a stretch of the Miramichi River with smallmouth bass, and there was quite a push to rotenone, and that's not the term they use, but that's the active ingredients. Like glyphosate is not what they called the herbicide, but the fact is I was a fisheries biologist for a time, and in this particular case, DFO was all set up to do this section of the river, which would have been wild because gilled salamanders and all the rest of it would have died, and a bunch of people stopped it at the last moment on the Miramichi. So I personally, as a fisheries biologist, rotenone entire lakes, and I didn't have a lot of luck with it. It wasn't me that decided it. I'm the one that did it. Use an outboard motor and you disperse the stuff all over the lake. There's often a weed bed near the shore where the fish can get in behind, and it's very hard to get the water, the poison, circulated into every part of the lake. So it definitely sets the target fish, in this case, pickerel, chain pickerel, or smallmouth bass, back. But the idea of actually removing all of them is almost a dream, I'd say, in a practical sense. So Amy, you have my best wishes, and I hope it works, because here we have the only species that's only in that section. It's so sad that we've had Johnny pickerel seeds and bass people that watch those shows, and they catch them and throw them back on the shows. So it's a real shame, and I won't go on about it, but I think that Becky and I have discussed the fact that a lot of people don't understand what happened with trout that get fished out of lakes, which leaves yellow and white perch, and in your case, the whitefish there not being fished as much, and you wind up with a lake full of white perch or yellow perch, and then people want to throw a fish in that'll eat the yellow perch and the white perch, and that upsets any residual population of trout or whitefish. So we've got these Johnny pickerel seeds that are wandering around the province, and they're in Lake Ainslie now. So I won't go on about it, but I really think, thank you for waking us up in terms of, thank goodness the forest cutters got thwarted, at least temporarily.
Yes, yeah, that was huge, because the pickerel are so far not in that lake, and if the logging had happened, and it's like it's a very, very pristine lake, yeah, comparatively. So.
And I want to thank you for standing up for this, because that's something Nature Nova Scotia has been trying to do. We're now 23 organizations, and people realize that admiring nature is the way you feel good, but you got to do more than that with what's happening to a lot of nature is disappearing in our lifetimes. So, so thank you all. I thought all 4 talks were quite interesting, and it was just a great weekend in terms of people having a chance to learn much more about particular issues and a broad range of thinking here. And thank you, Becky, for bringing this all together in spite of the way the whole website worked or whatever was wrong. I see Shinta has got her hand up. Hmm?
Virtual clapping.
Oh, that's what it means. Okay, sorry.
Bob, before we wrap up, we've just learned about Heather Marchionne's passing, who was our representative from Wild Flora Society and was a member of several societies. We should say something about her before we wrap up our night. We've lost a lot of really great naturalists in the last 2 years.
We need younger people. I mean, yeah, we lost Bob McDonald. We lost our first president. Yeah, and Heather would show up in a walker to upstairs meetings. She'd try to find an elevator in a superstore. And if anybody had an excuse to not attend a board meeting, she had it, but she wanted to be there. And she actually, I think, enjoyed our board meetings. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come. That's another key element, is to try to keep things moving along. And she made things lively with her presence. So I think she's going to be well remembered by those of us that were blessed with having her presence at some of these things. And she always had a word of encouragement. She had lots of challenges, but she was still willing to try to help nature, which was great. And as she was in the Wild Flora Society, so I think I should say that, just because the flora have taken a beating here too. We talk about forestry, but and I see that David said a few words there too about Heather. So thank you for raising that. I didn't know, Becky. I saw a Heather today, but we've also got a Heather Mayhew who's in the Friends of Endangered Harbor, so I wasn't sure who she was. Yeah. But did that just happen in the last day or so?
Yeah, well, it was David who alerted me to the fact. So yeah, recent. But yeah, we have lost too many good naturalists, and we're very lucky that we have so many keen people still around in our network, including everyone who's here tonight and our presenters for all you do for nature. Makes it all the more obvious how lucky we are, I suppose, when we lose one.
David says he just knew about it this evening. So, well, may she rest in peace. Thank you so much, everybody, for the thoughtful talks and for spending time when you could have been somewhere else to learn more about nature. Becky, you say the last word.
Well, I guess we'll see you at the next celebration in a year from now, but there's lots of stuff going on in the meantime. So most people are already on our email list, but if you're not, get signed up, follow us on social media. There'll be more events and talks and stuff over the summer, especially now that it's a little bit easier to go outside. There'll be more in-person stuff going on. So thank you for being here. Yeah.
Care.
Bye.